flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
I'll start down here on my right with introductions.
Dan Poisson, Ward 5.
Lydia Chapman, Ward 4.
Corin McWiggin, Ward 1.
Misty Edgecombe, Ward 2.
Pamela Albert at large.
Sue Doris, Superintendent.
Eric Gaudier, Ward 3.
Jay Rich at large.
Adam Platt, City Council Representative.
Scott Anier, Assistant Superintendent.
Amanda Kuchar, Business Manager.
And our student representative could not be here tonight. So we are going to start with, it doesn't look like we have anyone here for public participation tonight, so we are going to jump right into tonight's budget workshop, which is Cost Center 11, Adult Education and Revenue. Dr. Doris.
Yes. Go ahead. We have Director Tyner here, and she's going to start us off tonight.
Great, thank you. Can everybody hear me okay? Okay.
I think so.
I'm Jen Tyner, and I'm the director of the Auburn Adult Education Program, and also director of the Lewiston Adult Education Program. It's a shared directorship. So I'm here, and I want to thank you for having the opportunity to talk with you tonight a little bit about the Adult Education Program and to walk you through some of the new things that we're doing, some of the highlights that I like to focus on, and to talk a little bit about the budget, which is why we're here. So thank you. I'd like to start with, you can just advance, that's our mission statement. We talk a lot about lifelong learning, and that adult learning is part of that continuum. I always like to start by talking a little bit about the types of programs that we run in adult education. And essentially, if you have a program, you're looking at 3 types of sub-programs within the adult education program. There's academic programs, workforce programs, as well as enrichment or community education. And when we talk about our academic programs, we're really talking about anything from beginning literacy, including multilingual instruction, so for people who are learning English, who might speak multiple languages. We have our adult basic education program, which is really targeted for adults who typically are considered in need of some academic skill building. So there are people who maybe never quite got through their high school completion and aren't at that level. So we provide instruction in what we call adult basic education. And then we have our adult secondary education program. And that includes both our adult diploma pathway as well as our HiSET, or our high school equivalency program. Kind of new this year, I wanted to kind of feature a couple new things. So we're running some academic HiSET programming in a new location, which is the Auburn Resource Center. That's a great add because, and I'll talk a little bit more about the other locations where we operate out of, but that is a service center in Auburn. And so it allows us to make connections with some community partners as well as some drop-in programming that happens. So it seemed like a really good connecting point for people who are looking to do the HiSET. So we worked with Jennifer Edwards and the city to be able to establish a schedule where we're there once a week to provide on-site HiSET programming. And also new for academic programming this year is our adult basic education program for adults with disabilities. So we actually have started to do that. So for adults who might have been more consistently in like a functional life skills level in high school, trying to continue their education to build skills, communication skills, and socialization. So we do that as well. For our workforce programming, we are continuing with workplace literacy at Panellam. That's a project I talked about last year. So we work with our employer partner to establish employer milestones that have both academic skills tied to on-the-job expectations, and we work with those multilingual learners to be able to help them better understand contextualized English. And that project is ongoing. We also have continued with our CNA recertifications. We work with the state of Maine to be able to help people who have, maybe their certifications have lapsed, to help them to be able to continue their work once being licensed again. So we work to help people with that. And we have added some additional college and career access programming this year, including some extensive advising services for adults who are looking to go on to college or into some career training pathways. And then finally, I think everybody is familiar with our enrichment programming. We do have what I wanted to make sure to feature tonight, which is our new brochure. So this year, we actually changed our printer. So hopefully you've noticed we don't use newsprint anymore. Yay. It looks a little more professional, I think. And still, we tried to do the flipped design the first time we used the new printer. We have received some feedback in the community that was still a little bit confusing for folks to know, like, you had to flip it to the other side, and then it was Lewiston on one side, Auburn on the other. And so what we decided to do instead is, why fight it anymore? We are two communities, but more opportunities when we work together. Our enrichment programming is really about synergy. A lot of our academic programs and workforce programs are as well. We work so closely together, not just because of me, but because of the teams, and as a whole hub. So why not? Why not just name it? So we've decided we're going to keep with the tagline because it's been positive. And I think one of the biggest changes to highlight is that we have organized this by month. So in the past, it's been a little bit hard maybe to track like when classes are happening, but now you can keep it for a whole semester on your end table as you drink your coffee. And you can see what classes are coming up in April, because there are some. So please take a look. So I wanted to talk a little bit about adult education by the numbers. And so you can see here on this slide that I include the enrollment data that we had from last year, FY25, and then a snapshot of where we were at in February of 26. A few observations to note is that our high set numbers are increasing. That's actually not strange in Auburn. It's actually been true across the whole state that high set numbers are on the rise. I think it's a reflection of the economy and people wanting to get in and finish their high school completions to get better jobs, better employment. And so we're seeing those trends as well. And our multilingual enrollments are up too. Also not strange because we had a little bit of a gap at the beginning of the year before where we had a retirement and we were waiting to get a new staff member in place. So we're seeing that that program has been built back up and is continuing to thrive. We've seen a decrease in our workforce numbers. Unfortunately, I think that's mostly due to the fact that we had a workforce coordinator that was doing some grant work with us, and that position ended in December of 25. So unfortunately, a lot more new programs and continuation of programs has been a challenge without that additional person. And our enrichment numbers are looking good. They're right on track to where they could be, should be, but they're actually a little bit increased. And we're only in, like I said, we were only in February at that point. So I'm hoping we see even more of our enrichment programming. Next slide. So how are we staffed? Well, we have 3 full-time staff members, and those are listed there for you. 1 shared director. We have some part-time people, so people that work, like a lot of we have 1 full-time teacher, 1 full-time advisor, 1 full-time admin assistant, and then we have 5 kind of part-time regular teachers who work in the adult diploma, high set, and adult basic ed program. Those folks are not fully employed through Auburn Adult Ed. They work on a regular schedule, and they're hourly. And then we, of course, have opportunities for our enrichment teachers, and that varies about 12 to 15 enrichment teachers a semester. One of the things that I want to talk a little bit about, I think you know about the split with the 65-35, but one of the things we're looking to add for this upcoming FY27 is to go back to having some workforce support. There's some special revenue coming in, which we'll talk about momentarily to give you a sense of how that will be funded. So it's a new collaboration, but it would be set as a contracted service. That person is already employed in Lewiston, and they would be able to do up to 60% of their time in Auburn. And then we would kind of reimburse Lewiston for those services. And then, of course, I gave all the locations. Sorry, I forgot to mention that. But I think everybody knows, like, we're really out in the community. That's been a huge focus of mine, is we have a site here in Auburn Hall. We also have a site at the high school, but we also go out into the community. So we're at the High Street Congregation Church, we're at the public library, and now we're at the Auburn Resource Center. So if anybody else wants to invite us in, let us know. We're always open to that conversation. And then funding, so just to talk briefly about the funding this year, you can see kind of one of the things I'm really happy about and proud of is that our state subsidy has gone up. I always like to remind people there is a direct correlation, so if you reduce a local share, you will see in 2 years a reduction in state subsidy. That is because of how adult education is funded, and it's an expenditure model that's also prorated by category of expense. So it's kind of confusing, but if you reduce the local share, inevitably you see less coming in through the subsidy. So you can go backwards and you can see we had a slight increase, which has resulted in some extra state subsidy coming in, also due to the fact that there's been more intentionality around how we're coding different expenses. Thank you, Amanda. Because she's helping us to maximize what we get back for those in our subsidy. The local share, we're pitching this year to keep it flat, so no local increase. We don't need to ask for a local increase because we are receiving some additional funds in our special revenue of that $66,000. And so what that does is it allows us to cover any increased cost with salaries and benefits, and it will allow us to leverage some dollars to go towards workforce development, specifically targeted for the youth population. And so when those workforce programs are designed, they're going to be designed for the students who are 16 to 24, 25 years old, which is how they categorize the youth population in our Department of Labor world. Okay. And then I think that's it. Does anybody have any questions for me?
Adam.
I have a question. Thank you.
Yes.
So, in the context of workforce training, can you talk to us a little bit about, do you provide job placement assistance for some of these folks, or?
So almost always when we run workforce training programs, we do have employer partners on board. They don't promise employment because that would be a really high ask, but what we do often ask is that they participate in mock interviews so that the students have the opportunity to do an interview with an employer who's a local employer, and then the hope is that they'll make such a great impression that they'll be thought of for employment.
That's great.
Yeah.
That's great to hear. And my second question was, do citizens ever donate? Are there any avenues to receive donations from, private folks? Obviously, the 3 streams of revenue were not that, but I was just curious,
Right.
Are people donating to this program?
I mean, I think they can donate. I can't say that I have received any of those donations, but I think they can. I think it just has to be written in a way where those funds are targeted for something. So, most of the time, if we have donations, for example, in Lewiston, it might come from an employer sponsor. Like they might say, like a bank might give us a donation and say, these funds are to be targeted for employment training in the Teller program. And then we can leverage those dollars to help offset the expenses of running a program like that, for example.
That was kind of the vein of my question. I
Yeah.
was curious kind of what local, business is having an investment in this program. A panel is one of the
Yeah.
locations. I know
Yep.
that they have a very deep relationship. Both cities, the City of Auburn.
Yeah,
That's kind of
Yeah.
the source of my question.
it's a great question and certainly something I hope we can pursue if employers feel they can do that. Yep.
Any other?
This is mostly a comment for the committee here. When you get the invitation for the adult ed graduation, I highly recommend you attend. I've been to the other graduations, but there's something extra special about the adult ed graduation, and to have the opportunity to see that the doors are always open, and there's the welcoming arms right there to just raise these people up. And so,
Jay?
Thank you.
I loved hearing that we have a program for adults with disabilities, and I was just curious if you could tell us just a little bit more about that program, like what students are doing, what opportunities are available for them.
Yeah, so we actually have, the class happens on 2 days a week, and it's split with reading and math. And so what we do is we do 2 hours of reading followed by 2 hours of math, 2 days a week. And so students may or may not be able to participate that long, and they also may or may not be able to participate both days. That is okay, they participate as they are able, right? So we just welcome them in when they can be there. Some of the students need support in the class to be able to sit for that length of time. It's really kind of individualized in a way, in that we still use our CASAS assessment to help determine what the academic skills are that they're most in need of. But the teacher has a special education background, so she's very adept at being able to pull out trends and patterns. So some of it is individualized based on what the students' needs are, but then there's always this group component where we try to have them working together.
Thank you. Do they earn any sort of certificate or anything like that?
So we just have started it this semester, so maybe. I'm not gonna say no. I mean, they're not going to get any, like, we don't do it for credit, it's not that type of a program, but I mean, I think participation certificate, who doesn't love a good recognition? Absolutely, yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah,
I'd
you're
love to hear that.
Pat?
Is there special funding for that program?
Nope,
No?
it's just part of what we do, service we provide.
Any other questions? Thank you.
Great, thank you.
You're welcome.
I'll hang out.
And now we'll turn it over to Ms. Couture, who will be reviewing the revenue with us.
So just so happens the first slide for revenue is specifically adult education. So I've asked Ms. Tyner to stick around for a moment. You can see how things were broken down in FY26 this current year. The state subsidy was just over $101,000, and next year we are estimated at $116,000. And as Ms. Tyner said, that is kind of reflective of the fact that the city is keeping its allocation where it is a little bit higher. And there was a slight decrease last year, or in FY26, this year, I guess, if you will, because we had that open position, so we didn't expend all of our budget that year, so we saw a slight decrease in the subsidy because of it. So we see an increase for FY27 for the state subsidy. As she mentioned, the local allocation is staying the same, and the $66,000 tuition/other is that increase that we are actually receiving in funds from the state that will help with our workforce development. Do you guys have any questions for her before she leaves? Last chance for revenue adult ed questions. All right, thank you.
Thank you.
So we'll continue on discussing the revenue piece. One thing I wanted to note is in the paper clips that you received, there is an updated spreadsheet for revenue. The one you received the first week in March, I had an error in the adult ed state allocation. So we're gonna need you to take out the old revenue spreadsheet, which was in tab 2.
Okay.
I have the binder memorized. It's But in tab 2, the second sheet that you had was the revenue spreadsheet. We do have to replace that with the corrected one that you received today. And again, you'll see just a slight difference in the state subsidy amount for adult education at the bottom. That was an error. I'll give you a second to take a look.
Oh, there. Yep.
This one, right?
That's correct, yes, that one. So as you're all sorting those, I'm going to go ahead and just talk slowly about revenue. I want to make sure you're following along as best you can, but still at the same time organizing your paperwork. We've already discussed that our state subsidy did go up this year. We are seeing a decrease in state subsidy for debt service because our payments for debt service are going down. So along with that, most of that decrease is the Park Avenue project, that we paid off in full in FY26 this fiscal year. So next year we will owe nothing on Park Avenue and then going forward. So that was about $500,000, and then our additional $181,000 approximately is a decrease in interest for the high school bond. So seems we owe $681,000 less, we are receiving that much less in the subsidy. But our overall subsidy increase was $1.9 million, so that goes to speak about our general assistance. Our formula has increased our general subsidy by $2.6 million. I did include somewhere in your paperclip packet the ED 279. It's 6 pages of fun reading, if you'd like to take a look. It's actually very interesting, the information that they include in the formula to calculate our subsidy. Not to say that it will be the same next year. There is some work going on to change that, but you can kind of see how our numbers have increased from year to year in special ed. We do receive funding about 2 years after our expenditures take place. 2 years later, they're giving us some sort of reimbursement for the special ed costs. So this year's a big year in that it was 2 years ago that we started to see tuition costs really rise because we were paying for every day, not just when students were present. And I think Ms. Shaw spoke about that a couple weeks ago. So that helps, as well as we had our numbers go up. Our student population went up this year as well, as it did last year too. So feel free to stop me if you have questions, but that's all I had to talk about with our ED 279. Okay. The local allocation, for starters, the state, based on the valuation of the City of Auburn, the state identifies a minimum required allocation that the City of Auburn should be putting towards education here. So the amount that the state has identified as that minimum required, the first row in this chart here, has gone up by almost $600,000. Again, that is based on the valuation for the City of Auburn. The second piece is the local only debt. This is specific in our example, in our situation, to the high school bond. So we have no other large projects that were approved by the voters. So the 12% of that project that is paid specifically by the local share, that is just over $1 million for FY27. So that decreased by about $61,000 from last year. Again, interest payment. Yes.
Is that decrease, that's just the amort table? That there's
Yep.
no funny business, that's just 1 year later, the amort table goes down a year, we pay less?
That number we cannot make a decision on. It's been given to us the year we signed that bond. Yep. So I can tell you 10 years from now.
I was gonna say,
what
so
that
it's
decrease is
projected
gonna
for
be,
the next
right?
decade.
Yes, we have the amortization schedule tells us that. Yep. The additional local, so we are proposing that it increase by about $180,000. This is including adult ed. As she spoke, there is no increase to the adult ed amount, but when you look at the total for this row for FY27, that total is not just the general fund, it's also including that $217,000 for adult ed as well. But for the general fund, we've requested an increase of about $180,000. In that specific line, that's a 4.6% increase, but the overall increase, when you talk about the general fund and adult education, it would be a 3.3% increase for the local amount. Okay. Feel free to ask as we go. I like that. That's easier. Okay. It's harder to write down the questions, though. So when we talk about our overall operating budget, of course, our revenue has to match our expenditures, right? We have to guarantee to the voters that if we spend all of our money budgeted, we will be able to cover those costs with our revenue. So the state subsidy total is $42,809,000 and change. That's the total with the debt service and the general subsidy. The local allocation, $21,470,865. That is not including adult ed. This is just the general fund operating budget. Other is $655,000. So when you look at the revenue spreadsheet, that's kind of the middle of the spreadsheet where we bring in reimbursement for Maine care, for tuition at Franklin Alternative School. We have some rental fees, we have gate receipts, and a number of other items that we are able to bring revenue in from. So that was $455,000, and we're really working to increase that, and $655,000 is what we're hoping to do next year. I think we'll be just fine getting there. And the last piece, in order to true up our expenditures, we have increased the proposed use of our fund balance. This $2.35 million actually matches what we used in FY25, which isn't on this report here, but it does match what was used in FY25. Now keep in mind, like in FY25, we're almost done with the audit, very, very close. We did not use the full 2.35 million. We did use, we have a little over 1 million of that that's carrying forward basically. So we did use about 1.4 million-ish of that. But basically that fund balance that we have that carries over from year to year allows us to continue to keep our staff at the numbers that we're at. You know, we have an MOU with the city where we're covering our utilities and our repair and maintenance in our buildings. So 2.35 million is the highest that we've ever used. I would suggest keeping it there. But we do have the fund balance to afford that. After the FY25 audit, I expect our unassigned fund balance to be just under 5 million. So that would allow us to still use this 2.35 million for our revenue for next year. I knew there'd be fund balance questions.
So you're saying that after using this 2.35 million, we would still have 5 million in the fund balance, or 5 minus 2?
Yeah, the 5 million is the June 30 of 2025 number. So I can't tell you exactly today what we have in our fund balance, but at the end of our FY25 audit, which is very, very close, we've been working on the financials, it looks like we have about $4.9 million of unassigned funds. And so what that means is we can assign 2.35 million of that, and we would still have about 2.5 million unassigned. Should there be a very significant need, there's always that cushion. Well, yes.
Fund balance question.
I know.
So the 2.35, when we come to that number, is that because we need that as revenue to balance the budget, or is that because we predict within 5, 10, 15%, that's the fund balance that we will accrue? Are we taking our accrual and turning it into revenue, or are we picking a revenue number because that's what we need to balance the budget?
Well, we're doing that across the board, not just at the fund balance location. So we looked at our tax base and we said, you know, what's a fair request as far as an increase for our additional local. We looked at our other and we said, what more? We actually did, we added a reimbursement spot that we're working on reimbursing this spring, and we expect to be in full force next year. So we are looking to bring in more revenue there. So we actually we did a lot of digging across the board. Obviously the state subsidy we can't change, but the local allocation, the other, and the fund balance. So it was kind of a combination, but the truth is, yes, we have to match our expenditures. We do come up with our expenditures first, then we kind of work backwards to say, okay, well, where do we need to land here in the tax, in the other, in the fund balance in order to match that? But really, we went to the local and the other first and felt, you know, we had covered as much as we could to bring in more funds there too.
As a follow-up, after using 2.35 million as revenue, how does that play into the context of us holding too much fund balance? Are we not there yet? We need to see how the audit ends up in 2025 before we can have that conversation.
Well, I don't have an audited fund balance for FY25, as I've mentioned, but you're always asking me to give you information before we're done with that, so I'm
speaking in generalities. I'm not asking specific detail.
I did estimate, and it actually looks like we will be closer to 8% of our FY25 budget as far as our fund balance goes. So for those of you who weren't here when we finished our FY24 audit, For the third year in a row, our fund balance was above 9% of our budget. So our budget was 59 million in FY '24, and we had more than 9 million. So that was more than 9% of our budget. And so we were, noted of that in our audit, because 9% is the maximum for the Department of Education, the law. But this year for FY '25, it looks like we will be within the, below the 9% for the fund balance. Good news, and, I guess. But no,
It's just
I don't think we'll
news.
have
It's
a-
not good or bad. It's just
No,
news.
it's just news. So yeah, we should be just fine as far as that piece goes. It should not be an issue in the audit, so.
I do want to mention that we don't have our final health insurance rates. Those are coming mid-April. And when we looked at the use of the fund balance, we said, okay, let's see what comes to us in April. And if we have some cost savings there, we might reduce the use of the fund balance correspondingly. So,
Any other questions?
So really, I think just overall, to summarize, we're looking at an increase for the local share of 3.4%, correct?
In the end, it is 3.3% if we include adult ed.
Okay.
For the general operations, 3.4%.
Okay.
Yeah.
Any other questions, comments, discussion?
Did anyone have-
This isn't our last discussion about the budget, but just kind of general, yeah.
I think
Yes.
the transportation is very much set in stone. Unfortunately, special ed, we kind of have to gauge not knowing who will be in district. There's a lot of
yes.
in and out.
Special ed is always hard to predict.
Yeah. Oh, how many vacancies we have currently in our budget? We have a few special ed teachers, very few ed techs. I know most of our ed tech positions are completely full, but we do have a few special ed teacher openings, and then a few bus driver, 1 or 2 bus van aides, not drivers, but like they'll be aides with our special needs students. A guidance counselor position. We are constantly evaluating our numbers. In fact, Ms. Shaw has spoken to Dr. Doris and myself about some thoughts, and we're constantly looking at ways to not to cut necessarily, but to save. And I think it's important that we note that we are making a request for a budget, but if there's a place where we can save, we certainly will. I think that 2.35 million of the fund balance is a lot, and we recognize that. But at most, that's what we would need. But we're always going to look for ways for us to save. I mean, it may be October, and we say, okay, we have this unfilled position, and it's actually working. It's working the way we have it. Let's, we'll meet with the administrator and see, can we move forward with this plan instead? So we'll always do that, and that could be mid-year.
You're welcome.
And there's always the chance too, I mean, to your point of a couple of years ago, we had allocated 2 or 2.3 million and we didn't even use close to that. So those funds come back into the
That's
excess
right.
fund balance, right?
That's right.
To be used.
And we're,
down.
yes, and we're projecting out for the end of FY '26 in the next month. So we'll see where we land there and if it looks like we're getting close. I mean, there's always decisions that, leadership can make to make sure that we're being frugal and making the right decisions for the school department.
Adam? Oh, sorry, Dan.
Do you have any indication what the city council expects us to come in at? The city manager, or have they talked about that?
No, I don't have a number. Again, I said it at the last meeting, I think you're gonna hear conversations about parity in the increase of the operating budget across all departments. So without stating a number, I think if the city and the school are within a similar realm of increase on the operating budget, I don't think you're gonna see people waving red flags. But, I don't know.
I know in the past, they've always liked to be around 3%, so that's why I'm wondering if that's where they're gonna shoot for.
I think what complicates it this year is, I mean, even at the city level, we've got Scott probably has these numbers better than I do, but I think we've got a 5.69. We did this last week. 5.69% budget increase, but on the city side, I mean, we're obliterated with our debt service. That's what's killing us. So I think what we're trying to focus on the city level is to be responsible spenders with our operating budget. We can't change debt service. The public voted on a $45 million public safety building. There's nothing we can do about that. And frankly, this might not be the forum for it. This is a school committee meeting, but I don't know that the city council has an appetite to, get rid of 15% of municipal government to offset debt service. That's crazy. So I think we're going to focus on being responsible with the operating budget. The debt service is something that people voted on. And so I will advocate, and I believe that the rest of the council will advocate for similar standards to the school. So if our operating budget goes up X, I think we want to see parity with the school. And I think as it stands now, we're pretty close. So I don't think there's going to be anything major. There are certain counselors every year that ask school to spend more in fund balance. So that might be something that we have to clap back at and say, we're already spending X. So, but those are just some similar comments that we hear every year, and we'll have to deal with that. But
Any other questions or comments? Okay. So I think the idea tonight is to just do like an informal straw poll as to kind of where we're sitting as to how we feel about this budget, and ultimately voting on it in a couple of meetings and bringing it to the city council. So if we don't have any other questions or discussion before we do that, so I'll just do an informal straw poll. So all those in favor of bringing forward this proposed budget to the city council at this point, all those in favor? Okay. Thank you. And I think that concludes our budget workshop for this evening. Let me look at our agenda.
We have the public hearing on the budget next Wednesday, April 1st. And then we have our joint school committee city council budget workshop on the 6th, which is a Monday, April 6th at 5:30. And then we will vote on our budget on April 15th, Wednesday, April 15th.
Okay. I will entertain a motion to adjourn. Corin, second Jay, all those in favor? And we are adjourned at 6:40. Thank you, everyone.